Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, your brother, and your friend Rashid, and we have a real good guest today. I've actually been wanting to interview and pick um, this person's brain for at least a year and a half. He, we know him as a colonel, former colonel in the U.S. Armed Forces, and also the chief of staff of former Secretary of State and Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell, Mr. Larry Wilkerson. Let me see if I can bring him in because I see his picture in here, but I mean, I see him in the booth, but I don't see his picture. So I'm going to see Mr. Wilkerson. Are you there? Ah, there we are. How are you doing today, Mr. Wilkerson?
I'm doing okay. Your system apparently is like several other deal with. It won't take my very expensive camera. It only takes my Mac camera.
so, Mr. Wilkerson, I want to ask you. I mean, I've been dying to talk to you for about a year or so because of the craziness of the American political system and the constant push for war and all of this stuff. Like before we talk about that 800-pound gorilla, before we talk about the 800-pound gorilla, which is what's going on in the Middle East right now.
Right.
What is your take on the political system? Because the whole world is watching America, the so-called beacon of freedom and democracy, the so-called beacon of liberty and justice, and the dictator to everybody else of what um, uh, democracy should be. And we see a system that looks like a clown show or a circus.
I would not disagree with that description. Um, at the risk of boring you with a sweep of history, let me just say that this is what imperial regimes do. This is what empires do when they come to their end. This is what happens to them: overspending, overextension, particularly military overextension, and just the weaning of pride, if you will, and trying to make sure that what they see around them, which is inevitably that we are losing power every day, doesn't happen. And so you reinforce failure and you double down, you triple down. And that's what we're doing. And you have a choice here now. If you look back on history at the thousands of empires in the last 5,000 years, and I do mean that, if you look at some of the history that really extends itself out into the east, to China, to Persia, to the Roman Empire, Eastern and Western, then you understand there have been empires all over history, and they've all disappeared.
Mhm.
Every single one of them, including the one that the sun never set upon, the British, which disappeared for good in 56, but started in 1914. That's what we're doing right now. We're starting our 1914 and moving towards our 1956, and we're disappearing. And the rest of the world understands it. The rest of the world, led by the BRICS now, and the BRICS is much bigger than BRIC, led
Mhm.
by that movement and by a general multipolarity in the world now, is defying our single pole power. And we're desperately trying to stop that. Gaza, Ukraine, and a host of other places that are of lesser attention in the media are indications of that. And we will never be able to stop it. But in our desperation, we have something that no other civilization, no other empire in history has ever had: nuclear weapons. So we can commit suicide as an empire and take the rest of the world with us. And that's a very dangerous prospect.
And I believe that that's what is happening. I believe that they're trying to hold the world hostage to maintain their empire. My mom used to say, "If you're in a hole, stop digging." And
Yes.
and it seems like they just get the bulldozer and they're just digging more and more and more. And in a time when America's economy is faltering, there's a culture divide, there's a ethnic divide, there's strife everywhere, I mean, just divides everywhere, gulfs everywhere across America. It seems to me that the rational thing to do is to not antagonize people who can help cushion your fall when you completely crash out. But it seems like the leadership is saying, okay, forget that I'm going to antagonize everybody and I'm going to alienate friends and foes alike to try to maintain my position. To me, that is a non-starter. That's to me that's insanity. What do you think about that? Because it seems like this is the policy that the American leadership and the British leadership has. Let's antagonize everybody. Let's provoke everybody instead of looking at the position of, hey, if I humble myself and atone for some of the things that I've done, maybe as I fall, other nations will have sympathy and empathy for me, and maybe that will cushion my fall a little bit.
Well, you're describing what I've written about and talked about to a great extent, and that is that we need to find a glide slope off this incredible neoconservative design path we're on right now, which is defy the world, and principally to defy it with our military instrument and sanctions. Do you know that we now have, according to the Office of Financial Assets Control in the Treasury, we now have about a third of the world under sanctions?
Wow.
I mean, and some of these sanctions are horrible. They don't do anything like what we want them to do, hurt those leaders that we're opposed to. They hurt the people whom the leaders are oppressing in most cases themselves, or at least aren't leading very well. So you remember the days in Iraq when we had sanctions on Iraq and we killed 500,000 Iraqi children over a decade plus, and Madeleine Albright was asked about it, and she said, well, that's the price,
Hmm.
and I'm willing to pay it. That's the kind of people that we have in charge now. A lot of little Bibi Netanyahu's running around. Um, but he is unquestionably the personification of this incredible situation we've gotten ourselves into. That a man like that, a convicted war criminal, a perpetrator of genocide, could come to the House of Representatives and the Senate of the United States of America and address it as if he were some sort of hero, whatever you want to call him. It's just unconscionable. It's reprehensible. And yet we let it happen. Now, there were almost 50% of the Congress, no one wants to talk about this, including our media, that didn't show up. And there were people like Rashida Tlaib who held a sign up during the entire presentation, which I'm sure annoyed Mr. Netanyahu considerably. But basically, we present that image to the world of supporting a man who's practicing genocide. And right now, that man is doing his best to get us so deeply enmeshed in that region that we go to war with Iran. Now, look at what he's done here of late. Not only did he make a farce of the tragic killing of the Druze youngsters in the Golan Heights, and I just got word from a friend in the region as to how they welcomed him when he went out there to console them. They essentially jeered him and told him to get the hell out. They didn't want anything to do with him. But he was trying to turn that into an instance that would be rationale for him to attack Hezbollah and bring us in, of course, because he can't defeat Hezbollah by himself. Now look what he's done. That wasn't enough. Now he's killed the principal negotiator with whom he was dealing in Qatar for a ceasefire and a peace agreement, Hanea, in Iran, in Tehran. And Tehran is going to have to respond to that, which is what Bibi wants. So he got a twofer. He got another provocation of Iran that they might respond to in a significant way. And we've already said if they do that, we've got Israel's back. And two, he got rid of the most important person with regard to bringing about a ceasefire and a peace agreement, which he does not want. He wants to kill every possible Palestinian he can. And a ceasefire and a peace agreement would stop him at that. So stand by for the next iteration of this tragedy, of this catastrophe, to which we are linked almost as if we had a blood link to it, which is just preposterous. But that's the situation.
You know, this is not the first chief negotiator he killed. They
No,
months ago there was another negotiator that he killed also. So this should show people more than anything that he does not want this crisis to end. He does not want this a negotiated settlement. And also with that said about the killing, I was reading a write up from the UN, and they said they have suffered the most losses in the history aid workers. I believe it was something roughly like 200 or 220 aid
Yes,
workers have been killed by
yes,
Israel on purpose.
and
So
journalists,
no,
journalists
yeah,
as well.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So where is this going, Mr. Wilkerson? Because okay, if we look at the situation and we see that Israel blatantly violated the sovereignty, the territorial integrity of Iran, spit in the face of international law with this bombing, and it was time to coincide with the inauguration of the new president of Iran,
Right.
where Iran is backed into a corner now. They have to respond. So now, when they respond, America. I want to play a clip for you to see what this is a 40-second clip with the War Secretary Lord Austin, and I want you to see how can they justify intervening on Israel's behalf when the whole world saw what just took place, and this was just I mean, it was a blatant disregard for international law, and the United States is standing by it. Just listen to what he had to say. This just throws me for a loop here.
Can you confirm if Israel is behind the strike that killed the senior Hamas leader in Tehran? And did you get any warning that this was going to happen?
I don't have anything for you on that, and we certainly have heard the reporting, but I don't have any additional information to provide. Yeah, so what you heard me say yesterday is that if Israel is attacked, we certainly will help defend Israel. You saw us do that in April. You can expect to see us do that again. But we don't want to see any of that happen. We're going to work hard to make sure that we're doing things to help take the temperature down and address issues through diplomatic means.
So, in bizarro world, in the Orwellian world that is the U.S. politics, how can Iran's response be considered an attack? According to the definition, that would be a counterattack or a reprisal for what what Israel has done. And how can the United States justify to the people and to the world, because it is so-called the beacon of freedom and light, how can they justify taking Israel's side after this blatant act of aggression against Iran?
I think the frame of reference here should be if I remember the dates correctly, 1 April, 14 April, and 19 or 20 April events that transpired between Iran and Israel. Because here, Bibi was doing his best to get it started. His number one ask of the United States is that they take out Iran. That's what he wants. He wants the United States to take out Iran. If he has to go through Hezbollah to do that, he's willing to do it. But he wants us to take out Iran. So go back to those April dates. You had an egregious violation of international law when the Israelis flew into Syria, violated Syrian airspace, attacked the Iranian consulate in Damascus, and killed Iranian diplomats and other citizens. The response was massive from Iran, but it was coordinated with the United States through Oman. Bill Burns and others coordinated through the Sultan in Oman, and they worked with the Iranians to make sure that, one, the Iranians hit targets that were only military if they hit anything. Two, that we knew the flight path of all of the drones and missiles so we could shoot them down, along with the British, along with the Israelis, along with others in the region. And three, they made sure that nothing was significant in the way that the missiles hit. So they did a little damage to military targets. That was it. Then the Israelis were going to respond massively. This was Netanyahu's plan. Do Damascus, Iranians come back at you, then you do them big time. We cracked Netanyahu's head in this instance. We told him, you do that, we're not with you. And so he went back to Iran on the 20th, as I recall, and he hit an S-300 radar, period. Inconsequential. So we succeeded there in restraining him from doing what he wanted to do. He's back at it again now. But that's the model. Can we do that again with Iran? Because this was such an egregious violation of international law, of Iranian integrity, indeed of custom, because he was a guest of all things at their presidential inauguration. He was a guest. And here's how they did it. Austin probably didn't know this yet. It just came out this morning. They did it because they had planted a huge explosive charge in the residence where Hania really liked to stay when he came to Tehran. And to his detriment, obviously, he decided to stay there again as he was attending this function. And they exploded it, remotely exploded it. So they killed him. Now, Iran has said, all bets are off. You know, we worked it out last time. We worked it out and we don't want a war and you don't want a war. So we're not going to be the ones that start it. Now, I suspect they're talking in the highest places in Iran right now about a significant response. And a significant response would mean it wouldn't be coordinated with the United States and Tel Aviv would be burning. Tel Aviv and half of Israel would be burning, flaming. What's Netanyahu going to do then? He's going to applaud because he's got what he wants, because he believes, and his visit to the Congress confirmed it for him, that the United States of America will be behind him when he then retaliates massively against Iran. That's his plan. And if that doesn't work, he's got a backup. I'll take on Hezbollah, and through Hezbollah and my losing, because he will lose if he takes on Hezbollah, then the United States will be compelled to come in and will go after Iran because they're ultimately Hezbollah's backers. So he thinks he's got all the avenues covered right now for bringing the United States in to do what he has always wanted them to do, and that is to go after Iran.
But there's a little misunderstanding on his part because Israel is a welfare state and it receives a lot of its money from the United States and the EU. And right, if war breaks out, Iran closes off the Strait of Hormuz. America's economy and the European economy is already in trouble. This then shuts down 20%, 25% of the world's oil supply or gas supplies. That sends these nations that are keeping Israel's economy afloat into an economic tailspin, which collapses the Israeli economy also. So is he that insane to and is willing to throw the entire world to the wind to try to accomplish the goal of trying to destroy Iran? Because it seems like that's insane. We know he's insane, but it seems like that is the epitome of insanity.
I think it's wrong and dangerous to consider him insane. You might, and I might agree with you, a broad definition of insane. He's a very smart man. He's an evil man. He is a fundamentally evil man. There probably has not been such an evil man on the face of this planet since Adolf Hitler. Bibi Netanyahu is just like Adolf Hitler. He will kill and kill and kill, stay in power, doesn't want to go to jail. I got to stay here. I don't want a peace agreement. I don't want a ceasefire. And I want every single Palestinian dead. That's my perfect wish. And I want the United States to do a lot of my heavy lifting for me. Now, back to your points, though. The Israeli economy is already tubing. It's falling apart right now. And many of the big tech companies that were giving it a cutting edge in that field are leaving or have already left. The Port of Eilat, for example, at the tip of the Gulf of Aqaba, that little gulf that comes off the Red Sea, is bankrupt. The Houthis have largely done that by impacting Red Sea commerce. You're right about the oil in the Persian Gulf, except for one thing. We've seen this before. These countries will sell their oil regardless. So it's difficult to shape a view that anything in the Persian Gulf in terms of stoppage of oil flow is going to be really effective in doing anything. But what is going to be effective is what is happening right now. It's what's happening in Israel right now. One, they are becoming an international pariah. No one wants to deal with them, from Turkey to Russia to China to whomever it might be. Two, their economy is really batting on about one cylinder out of six right now. Three, their people are leaving. And there are thousands more who have dual passports who are ready to leave. And once this big thing starts, they will leave. You've got 50, 60, 70,000 who've relocated off the border with Hezbollah. And you've got another 60, 70, maybe 100,000 who've relocated off the border with Gaza. and you got another 100, 200,000 who have already left, and one standing literally almost at the airport with their passports in their hand to leave. So you have got the state that was supposed to be the most secure place on the face of the earth for Jews becoming the most insecure place on the face of the earth for Jews, all through Netanyahu's artistry. He's done the whole thing. He's created this whole situation for him. And need we talk about his relationship with Hamas before October the 7th, when he was funding Hamas through Qatar, because he felt Hamas was an ally, because Hamas was dead set against a two-state solution. And so was Bibi. So he was funding Hamas. He was helping Hamas when they attacked him on October the 7th. This is a comedy of eras, but it's a comedy of tragic eras because it's killing countless numbers of people, a lot of them women and children. And that's Netanyahu's purpose. And don't for a moment think that if he gets his wishes with regard to Gaza, which is to kill as many as he possibly can and drive as many as he possibly can out if he doesn't get a chance to kill them, that he won't settle Gaza the way he settled the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. That's his ultimate goal, is to have greater Israel, and with nothing but Jews or subservient third and fourth class citizens. I reckon it to America during the 50s. Remember how blacks were treated in America, especially in the South, in the 50s. Well, that's the way they're going to treat. That's the way they treat now. They're third and fourth class Arab citizens. If there's anybody left in Israel that is a citizen of Israel and not a Jew, they'll be treated that way. So we're looking at an apartheid state ad nauseum out into the future. That's Bibi's goal. And we're backing it. We are backing it.
Do you think that this strike in Iran, or this covert operation that was carried out in Iran, was to trap the United States also into this war cycle, that because they had to know that Iran would be forced to retaliate?
Yes. It all depends on how well oiled those diplomatic channels through Oman still are, and how much the Iranians still want to stay out of a war with the United States, and how much we still want to stay out of a war with them, because it was mutual before. In April, it was mutual. Neither one of us wanted a war with the other. And this was when they had the old president. Remember, he was a hardliner. Now they've got a new president who's a relative moderate. So if we can talk each other into containing the response, so that it's not something that's, a casus belli, a reason for war. But I don't know. The Iranians have put up with a hell of a lot to this point.
And there was a report that another general, Iranian general, was assassinated in Syria, I believe it was, or in Lebanon.
In Lebanon.
Lebanon.
Yeah. That's standard Israeli practice. It's just
why is this okay for Israel to target and assassinate leaders? But and it's crazy, because what I'm saying is the U.S. leadership bags this stuff, and everybody is looking. All of the nations are looking and saying, "Hey, how can you dictate to us international law and what is right and what is wrong when you continually ignore the transgressions of Israel and their ignoring of international law and everything else?" And it to me, it's pushing America into a position of isolation, because other nations are saying, "You know what, America, she's going to back Israel, right or wrong. They just flaunt international law." And it's I think it has gotten a lot of people to move out of the sphere of the United States. Do you think
Absolutely.
she's being isolated internationally?
Absolutely. It started majorly with George W. Bush and state-sponsored torture. We lost much of the world that was more or less kind of hanging on the cusp, waiting to see if the United States were really going to be the single power in the world, and how bad that would be after the Cold War was over. Once we started sponsoring state torture and the world found out about that, a lot of people began to fall away from us, particularly people in what we used to call the third world. They just decided the United States was not the power to be affiliated with. And at the same time, they had a Chinese Belt Road Initiative that was flowing into their countries. And it was offering money, and it was offering diplomatic help, it was offering economic and financial help, and came with some strings tied. But generally, if you negotiated with the Chinese, you could get a better deal than if you negotiated with America. So these two forces have caused the United States to become increasingly isolated. And now Ukraine and Gaza have caused people to make solid decisions about whose side they're going to be on in the future, or whether they're going to be neutral. Some of them have decided to be neutral. One of the most powerful countries in the world, potentially, is still waiting to make its decision, India. And I say this, the way India goes signals the end of the American empire, because the Indians more and more are siding with Putin, Xi Jinping, and the other BRIC countries. And they're more or less looking out for their own interest. And they're looking at us and saying, you've gone crazy. You may think I'm crazy. I may prosecute my Muslim population, but I'm not nearly as crazy and as evil as you are. And so I'm going to make my decision. Another country to watch is Turkey. Turkey is one of the most powerful countries in NATO, if not the most powerful country in NATO. Its army is even better than ours. Its land army is better than ours. It's bigger, it's better equipped, and it's fiercer. And everybody in the militaries of the world knows that. So we're forcing Turkey to make a decision too. And Turkey's going to go that way also, either into neutrality and leave NATO, or it's going to join with the BRICS. We are going to be isolated, just as Netanyahu is isolated now. And you know, I say this sometimes to my colleagues, we and Bibi will be the only people on our side of the lane. The rest of the world will be on the other side.
Speaking, you just brought up Russia, and you just brought up the Ukrainian conflict. Because I've heard little to no information out of Western press about the recent attack on Wagner groups in Mali, and the killing of Malian soldiers. And do you think that was orchestrated by the West to exact revenge because they're lashing out, they're losing at every turn?
There's a real problem with our policy in Africa. I remember when Colin Powell said one of the biggest mistakes we'd made was creating Africa Command, because what we did when we created a military command for Africa was we militarized our policy towards Africa. And we both knew that that was going to be a total failure. And we're being kicked out now. Country after country is telling us to leave because they understand we're not there for their well-being. We're there because we want to spread ourselves militarily across the continent of Africa. The Russians are the same way to a certain extent, but the Russians come at it in a little bit different way. And that way seems to be a little bit more successful than what we've been doing. So when you see a replacement, if you will, for us in Africa, whether it be in Niger or Mali or whatever, it usually is the Russians. Not that they're that much better than us when it comes to dealing with Africa, but the Africans have had enough of us. They've just flat had enough of us. The bigger situation with regard to Ukraine is lost. It's lost. It's going to be a rump state at best and maybe nothing at worst if it continues. Zelensky has made a move to Moscow. He said he will negotiate for a ceasefire and then a peace agreement. The Russians must be at the table, he has said this time. And he said there are no preconditions. Well, we're whipping on him now, trying to keep him from doing that. And we is not just Washington, it's also Brussels and Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, and other NATO countries who are just insane as we are. But at the same time, they're waking up. The French electorate has awakened to a certain extent. Hungary's awakened. Orban is trying to use his presidency of the EU to actually be a peacemaker. Slovakia has awakened. Germany will awaken as soon as they have their elections, because Schulz's poll ratings right now are so low that he's lower than Joe Biden. I mean, he's down around the 26% mark. So Germany's not going to have the leadership that it has right now in a few months. You're going to see NATO start to fall apart. And that's a product of this stupid war in Ukraine, which is our fault. It's our fault because we were warned again and again and again that Putin felt that what we were doing in Ukraine was an existential threat to Russia. And he warned and warned throughout the early 2000s and then in 2014 that he would have to take some sort of action if we kept on doing it. And so why the surprise when he took military action? And now he's won. And we're acting like he hasn't. And we're going to fight this thing, it looks like, to the last dead Ukrainian.
And it seems like the U.S. should have had a leg up on it because Mr. Burns had already warned about Russia's red line.
Yep.
And yet the United States ignored the warning by Mr. Burns. And now even he is saying something different than what he wrote when he was the ambassador in Russia. They act like they cannot comprehend, or they're like children. You know how children act, spoiled, and if you don't give them what they want, they just throw a temper tantrum. And it seems like that's what the leadership is doing. Russia has defeated the highly trained, the best equipped non-NATO ally 3 times, and now we're close to the 4th destruction of the Ukrainian armed forces. Shouldn't this make the U.S. and NATO back off? Because, hey, if Russia has beaten them 4 times over, then what will Russia do to us if we continue to violate their red lines? I mean, does common sense even reign in some circles in Washington, Brussels, and London?
Well, this is what scares me most of all about this conflict in the heart of Europe. The United States will not back down. We will reinforce strategic failure again and again and again. And what I'm worried about is if we were to come in contact with the Russian army, as battle hardened as it is now, we would be roundly defeated. So would NATO, roundly defeated. Now, Putin doesn't want a war with NATO because that would mean full mobilization in Russia. And thank you very much, but his economy is going bangers right now, and he's doing very well, and he doesn't want to, crash everything. But if it came to it, we would lose. And what would we do? And here I'm back to my old bugaboo and my greatest fear. What we would do is go nuclear. People forget in 1945, guess who the country was that used nuclear weapons on other people? We would do it again. We would do it again. Rather than lose, rather than go down big time to a Russian juggernaut, it will probably be Russian and Chinese juggernaut that we would go down to. We'll use nuclear weapons. And then, all the betting's off. Because all of our doctrine during the Cold War, all the studies we did, demonstrated to us rather conclusively that once you start, you don't stop escalating. And when you do that, you destroy most of the planet.
Wow. So in essence, you're saying that the leadership, they're berserkers, or they're straight lunatics willing to cause global extinction to save face.
I hope not. I hope sanity prevails in the end, but I was completely devoid of that hope with regard to Joe Biden. And I now realize, I suspected it all along, that it was partly because I think he's suffering from dementia. I mean, I'm 5 months short of 80, and I sometimes can't even remember why I went upstairs or why I went downstairs. So I understand the malady. I understand it, but I don't want someone affected by that malady to be on the nuclear trigger. So maybe we have accomplished a major achievement here with getting Kamala Harris in there big time to be the candidate and so forth. But I'm not totally sanguine about it. I just don't understand how we're going to make it through the next 6 to 8 months, given the mistakes we've made and the almost inability we have to fall off those mistakes, admit that we made them, and do something to repair them. We don't seem to have that capacity anymore.
Hmm. Isn't that like that old saying, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result is the definition of insanity?
And I would add to
And it
that and
seems
say
like the
it's
leadership.
yeah, it's a
Oh, go
definition
ahead.
of
Go ahead.
insanity. It's a definition of insanity and suicide.
it's I sometimes it's hard for me to process the policies of the West because they're everywhere, and it's the policies are not rational, not sane, and not sound. So I'm saying, are these people adults because they act like children?
Well, the policies are sane and sound if you're on the end of the billions of dollars pouring into your bank accounts. And there are enough people in this country, CEO of Lockheed Martin, for example, for whom that's true. You're making a fortune off of this. I remember Dick Cheney trying to tell everybody that his money that invested in Halliburton, where he'd been CEO, Halliburton made $40 billion off Iraq and Afghanistan. And Cheney tried to say, well, my money's in a blind trust. I can't touch it. Well, when he retired from government service, the blind trust became his trust. So, I think his fortune went past $75 million. When you make war that remunerative, that profitable for people, then war is what they want.
To me, that seems like, as again we go back to, it seems like these people are lunatics because how can you choose profit over lives? Money you can lose and get back. But once a life is snuffed out, you can never get that life back. I don't care how many other lives you produce. You can never get the lives that you snuff out back. And so they are willingly and openly putting profit and money over lives and security. These people should be removed from power, office, and their wealth should be confiscated from them.
Well, you should put yourself in the pulpit and get these people to come be part of your congregation because they damn sure don't want to listen to me or anyone else. Yeah, money's everything for them. Money's everything, and they don't ever think about the next day and the next and the next. They just think about the bottom line, and they're very content, very happy to be a part of that bottom line. I mean, I worked with him for almost 40 years, and at the end of my career, for 10 or 12 years, I worked with Powell at the highest level of people like that in this country. And I saw behind the scenes. I saw the Charles Kochs, I saw the Robert Mercers, I saw the Peter Thiels, I saw all these people who, incidentally, many of whom are now congregating around Donald Trump, who have no compunction whatsoever at screwing everyone as long as it enhances their bottom line.
Wow. Wow. That says a lot about the people's characters. Um,
Doesn't it?
what do you think? Because we see what's going on, and we know that Iran has to respond to what's going on. When they respond, do you think that this will go regional quickly?
I'm hoping that the new president is able to influence the Ayatollah and the Guardian Council and the IRGC, as well as the regular military in Iran, and their leadership to the point that the same thing prevails as prevailed in April. They do not want a war with the United States, and they'll do anything to prevent that. And so they'll tailor their response to something that they believe and will have coordinated with us to make sure we believe too. It will not be something that starts a war. And that'll thwart Netanyahu again. So rest assured, he'll be right at it again, trying to get something. He's got two fronts to work on. He can work on Hezbollah, and can work directly on Iran. So Hezbollah is a bigger threat, though a little bit more indirect into Tehran, but it's a bigger threat really at the moment than Iran itself, because Hezbollah has the ability to decimate Israel. They'll decimate themselves in Lebanon too, but they have the ability, the capacity to stand Israel off totally. They'll take a blow and Lebanon will be burning and in ruins, worse even than it is now. but Israel will be burning and in ruins too. And so in the middle of that, Netanyahu is going to ask us to bring our air power into the Eastern Mediterranean and bomb the bejesus out of Hezbollah. So are we going to say yes, or are we going to stand back and say, nope, you got, not like 82 and 83 when we bailed you out, when you invaded Lebanon and we bailed you out, and we lost 242 Marines in a single day. Not like that. We're not going to be with you. You did it. You're on your own. Then Israel as a state is finished.
Jenny BN says this right here. She says, why do people expect Iranians to be the big man in the room after demonizing Iran since 1978? You know, and I understand what she's talking about. Go ahead.
That's a good question. That's a good question. After the way we treated them in 53 when we overthrew their democratically elected government, Mohammad Mossadegh, and then what we treated them with the Shah and the Savak and the secret police and everything. But you have to look at it in realistic terms, too. Iran knows that if we really started a war with them, they would suffer badly, perhaps even existentially. We would, too, but it would be really terrible for them. So they don't want that, and I don't blame them. So they're willing to take insult after insult and injury after injury and just do a little bit here and a little bit there to make it look like to their people that they're responding, and not risk an existential conflict with the United States. But there's her question suggests this. There's an end to that. You can only take so much. And God knows we might be at that end.
I was reading an article coming out of Iran earlier this morning where the Ayatollah said that Iran will respond directly to Israel. So if that is coming out of Iran, then that means that they are preparing for missile strikes. And what do you say? I know that the United States surveillance in the skies are watching everything that's going on in Iran, expecting a strike. There was an article that came out in the Wall Street Journal today stating that it's official. Iran will strike Israel directly. Where would this lead us? Because remember, before you answer, remember that Iran is not attacking Israel. Iran is responding to the attack by Israel.
Right. If we think it's proportionate, we can get away with saying it's proportionate. And Iran knows that. So were I Iran, I think I would probably pull the wool out from under the Israelis' feet the way Hamas did on October the 7th. I think I would take someone out. I would take someone out that's important, and I would take them out in their own country, on their own time, on their own ground. And Iran can do that. It's demonstrated that capacity in other places in the world in the past. And I wouldn't just do one, I'd do 3 or 4. And in expectation, a couple of them, or maybe 3 of them, if I did 4, would fail because the Israelis are going to be on the alert. But if you did 4 or 5, one of them would succeed. And then that one would be your response. Let's say they took out Smotrich, or they took out Ben-Gvir, or one of the other hard-line Nazis who works for Bibi Netanyahu. They could do that. And that would be a proportionate response, in my view. And so what would we do? We would make protestations and say it was a violation of international law and all that crap that we care nothing about anymore. But it wouldn't be a provocation for a wider war, which is what Netanyahu wants. So I count on the Iranians being as smart as the Persian history indicates they are sometimes.
Do you believe that Bibi Netanyahu thinks that the United States is disposable? Because with the situation again, back when we talk about the economics, the United States economy is tail diving towards collapse, just like the Israelis. And if war breaks out, that just put more weight on the already overweighted U.S. and EU economies. So do you believe that he knows that and is willing to just throw America to the garbage bin to accomplish his goals?
I don't think he cares a hang about America. He cares that our weaponry and our money is behind him, but he doesn't care a hang about America. If America disappeared tomorrow and China took his back, he'd take China. That's just the mercenary that he is. At the same time, I think we are, as you've just suggested, at a crucial point in our own financial and economic situation. We're looking at $50.7 trillion of aggregate debt by 2032, 2033. We've already got enough aggregate debt right now that the interest payments this year were $1 trillion. By the time we get to that 8 years down the road, 9 years down the road, by the time we get to that debt, we will be paying the equivalent of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and the entire defense budget on interest payments on our debt every year, or we default. We've already been downgraded in our credit. The mainstream media hasn't carried anything about this. You have to go to the Congressional Budget Office to read this stuff, or you go to the Swiss Bank of International Settlements to realize just how badly the globe is right now. $60+ trillion in debt. Maybe twice that. Corporate debt and personal debt as bad as state debt. The catastrophe is staring us in the face. And guess what? A lot of people in my political party, the Republican Party, think is the best solution for that: a global war. A global war will fire everything up again, get everything going again, get all the industry pumping things out, bombs, bullets, and bayonets, get everybody at work again and so forth, destroy all this debt. War is the greatest forgiver of debt. It's the great creator of debt and the greatest forgiver of debt if you win. That's their theory. Their theory is we need a global war.
So they're willing to, so they can stay in power, so that they can keep their economic system going. They're willing to.
They think that's the only way to save capitalism. They see the problems with capitalism. They understand the greatest maldistribution of wealth in the history of the capitalist system exists today, and it exists in America. The wealth gap is so huge right now that you have to scratch around in the hinterland to look for the middle class. You're either poor or you're filthy rich. That's what we've turned into. Do you know that Israel has more billionaires than we do on a per capita basis? That's what we've done to Israel. That's what Netanyahu's done to Israel. They're just like us. They have this huge maldistribution of wealth. You can't do that. You can't do that to people for extended periods and not have some sort of revolution or some sort of change.
So how does America think she's going to take on her largest lender, her largest investor, her largest trade partner, and the largest economy, according to Purchasing Power Party, which is China?
Yep.
How does she think she's going to pivot away from the Ukrainian crisis, and the Middle East and North African crisis to take on the Chinese?
Let me give you this from the NATO summit. Here's what they said. They said NATO needs not simply to defend Europe, but to expand into the Pacific with preparation for protracted war with China and others. It's not just us that are crazy. It's Brussels too. We are going to spin off Ukraine and take on China and others. This is insanity, but that's their official statement.
My God. Wow. So you go from being insane to hyper insanity because Russia's military industrial complex is already outproducing the entirety of the West, and China's dwarfs Russia's military industrial complex. I was looking at a report that came out from the Navy saying that the Chinese shipbuilding capacity is over 200 times that of the United States. And then
Absolutely.
in a how in the world do they think that they could successfully prosecute the war when 93 to 95% of all goods on the shelves in America comes from China. So one of the first casualties of that war would be China sanctioning or embargoing the United States, which means that all of these banks would go belly up, all of the stores would close, all of the shipping lines would shut down, and they would go belly up, which would further destroy the U.S. economy. How is that even sound thinking?
Well, some of these neoconservatives think that the answer to that, the cure for that, is to destroy those means of productions in China. That is to say, you need a war, and they would say they need the war quicker rather than later because those means of production in China are only going to get better, not worse. So you need to destroy them while they are destroyable. I've been in places where I've heard these people say these things. We need to take on China now, not later, because they might indeed be capable of beating us later. My response to them 5 years ago was they're capable of beating us now. You know, I had an argument with a guy the other day who was talking about the navies, and he said, we've got about 270 ships and they've got 330, so they got a few more than we do. I said, and they can build about a ship a month. We can't build a ship a year. And he said, well, yeah, but the existing navies are. I said, you taking a look at the Chinese fishing fleet lately? It has over 5,000 ships, and every one of them is armed to the teeth. Ask the Filipinos, ask the Vietnamese, ask anyone in the South China Sea who's come up against the Chinese fishing fleet. Or I'll send you a picture of the last real display they had of their fishing fleet. Now, mind you, this display is only a third of the fleet off of Haiphong Island, a third of the fleet. And you can't see anything in both directions but ships. That's their fishing fleet.
Whoa. So where is all of this leading us, Colonel? Because we have no adults in Brussels, we have no adults in London, none in Paris, none in Berlin, and specifically and especially zero are in Washington. And where will this eventually lead us in the Middle East and Ukraine and in the South China Sea? Where will this lead us?
The best I can hope right now is that we get so chastened in both Ukraine and Gaza. And let me footnote the Gaza part with I do not think Israel will be a state in the future. I think we're at a point right now where Israel to be a Jewish state has made it impossible. Now they can be a liberal democracy. They can be, a sort of liberal democracy that has a lot of apartheid in it, but they can't be a Jewish state. The Jewish state's the most dangerous thing that they could possibly want to continue because they have now made enemies of everyone in the region. Everyone in the Levant, everyone in the Middle East is an enemy of Israel. So that is going to be sobering, I think, for those Jews who are left in Israel. And it's going to be sobering to find that Ukraine is a rump country and Russia has won. And Russia doesn't want to go any further. Russia has no desire to go any further, no desire to take on NATO in a conflict that would be existential for us both and wind up being nuclear. So where does that leave Europe? You got 700 million Europeans whose GDP last year was the equivalent of ours, around $23-24 trillion. But they can't get their political act together. The EU is a joke. The EU is a total joke. These last parliamentary elections proved it. More than half the people didn't even vote. They don't care about Brussels because Brussels is autocratic. It's dictatorial. It's not democratic. So they hate Brussels. The French hate them. The Germans hate them. The Poles hate them. Everybody hates the EU. So where is Europe and where's the United States and where's the transatlantic relationship when this Ukraine thing finally boils down and somebody has some sense, probably Zelensky, and says, to hell with you, Washington, to hell with you, London, to hell with you, Brussels, I'm making peace. You're killing my people. Where are we going to be then? What are we going to do? Because we are going to be the laughing stock of the world.
Wow. I want to play some. This is a short clip. I want your take on what this means for the United States and the rest of the world. Here it is, right here.
Well, because it's losing in peaceful economic competition. The United States claims its economy is dynamic, etc., but the real reality is that it's losing in the competition to China. I mean, if we take the situation in the pandemic, since the beginning of the pandemic, in the 3 years of the pandemic, China's economy grew 2.5 times as fast as the United States. China grew over 13%, the US just over 5%. If you take the addition to world GDP in this period, it's 36% to China and about 16% to the United States. Then if you look at the individual companies, the US can't compete in telecommunications with Huawei. TikTok has become the most popular, so therefore the US is trying to ban Huawei. TikTok has become the most visited website in the world, so the US is now considering banning TikTok. Hikvision is the best producer of cameras for surveillance, etc. I mean, for safety surveillance in the world. So the US can't compete with that. The US admits that the whole solar power industry is totally dominated by China. The US is losing in peaceful economic competition. The only place in which it maintains a lead is military, because it spends more than the next 9 countries in the world put together. So therefore increasingly tends to try to put things on a military terrain. And this is very, very dangerous, because the world wants to get on with peaceful development, but the US wants to move things more and more towards military actions.
What is your summarization of what he said?
I certainly agree with those last remarks he made. And basically, I'm no economist, but I agree with the preliminary remarks he made too. I think it's even worse in some categories, high technology, for example, where we claim we're way ahead and we're not. If it weren't for Taiwan, we wouldn't be where we are, even as it is. And that's one reason we want to zealously hold on to Taiwan. But that's also a reason China wants to hold on to Taiwan. Some of the best tech engineers in the world are in Taiwan. The dilemma here with what he said, and he's a typical, and I'm not criticizing him, he's a typical guy who talks about finance and economy and such, and then the military. He's wrong about the military. Our military is a hollow force. It's a paper tiger. We can't even recruit enough people for the military. The reserve component of the Army, essential for mobilization and therefore for war, big war particularly, was 33% recruiting last year and 30% short the year before that. The active duty Army is having to take active duty lieutenant colonels and put them into the Army Reserve to command their battalions because there aren't any lieutenant colonels in the Army Reserve. There are no nurses or doctors. The mobilization base for hospitals and everything is in the reserve. There aren't any. I was just talking with Major General Margaret Wilmoth, who was in that business for most of her life, some 40 years or so. She says it's so bad that she can't get the Congress to understand that it's so bad in the reserve components. The only military force that's recruited up to its in-strength goals for the past 5 years is the Marine Corps. The Air Force is short fighter pilots. The Navy is short. It's so short people that they can't even sail some of their ships because they don't have a full crew complement. And we're going to fight somebody with this. No, we're going to use nuclear weapons.
Wow. Mr.
And
Wilkerson.
you talked about the money we spend. Yes, we spend money. But guess where 52% of the defense budget of almost $1 trillion went last year? It went to the CEOs of Lockheed Martin and other defense contractors. And it went to pay and allowances for this all-volunteer force, which requires $300,000 bonuses in some specialties to keep people in.
Wow. 300.
Yes. The propensity to serve in the United States amongst 18 to 24-year-olds is as low as it's ever been in our history, 9%. 9% is all of the 18 to 24-year-old part of the population that has any propensity whatsoever to be recruited. We have an entire, let's see, we have 9,000 NCOs, non-commissioned officers, the best non-commissioned officers in the Army, 9,000 of them. That's 3 brigades of NCOs out recruiting. And we still can't recruit enough people for the services.
Mm. Does that signify the collapse of the American empire?
It does in many respects. It signifies that young people, if you started a big war, would be in Canada and Mexico tomorrow morning.
Oh my God, Mr. Mr. Wilkerson, it's been a pleasure. I won't keep you long because I know you're busy. Um, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you joining us, and the bluntness, the honesty, the in your face truth, and we really really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. And let me tell you, I don't have any pleasure at all in citing these things to you because it's my country too, you know. And I feel so bad for the young people coming up, including my grandchildren.
So it's bleak. It's looking more bleak by the day because of who's at the helm of the empire. Um, this has been a great. We got to have you back. We have to have you back on the platform. Thank you so much, Mr. Wilkerson.
Surely. You take
And
care and have a good day.
be blessed and be safe.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Everybody, again, hit that like button. I told you we're coming at you with some real good truth. We have in about 30 minutes we'll have Tom Luongo on the platform. So come back and visit us in about 25, 30 minutes. Get your popcorn, go use the bathroom, get you some water. You know what I mean? Get your heads up on the news and come back and visit us in about 25, 30 minutes, okay? On that note, listen, know that I love you if you love truth. But know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Before we move further on, remember this: do right, not because people are watching, but because it's the right thing to do. We're going to go out the same way we always come in, but this time it'll be a little bit different. I want to thank each and every one of you who support us on Patreon, who supports us as channel members, who are just subscribers or viewers. Thank you because you did not have to give me your time and you chose to. And from the bottom of my heart to the depth of my soul, I want to tell you out of my mouth, thank you. I really, really am humbled by it and I really, really appreciate it. And I thank each and every one of you. So I got to go out and I got to say this. I got to beat my son in saying it because he thinks his nana is his and nobody else. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Deuces, everybody. Thank you. And join us back in a few minutes, okay? Peace. We're out of here.